Hey guys, Hades here. Today we're going to talk about British English versus American English. There's a lot to it, and of course, we can't get through every little word, every little thing, but we'll try to get through a lot of it, talk about a lot of it, hopefully, give you some ideas of some differences. Now, when I say American, I'm not referring to maybe American territories, just the US states. And again, I'm mostly talking about standard American English versus standard British English. When I say Britain or the UK, I'm referring to England, Scotland, and Wales, of course, also Northern Ireland. Now, I know Northern Ireland is technically not part of Britain, but it is part of the United Kingdom. But I'm just lumping that together and giving a standard on that. Also, I will briefly talk about Irish in one slide, and it's a standard thing, even in the U.S. Even in England, which is smaller than the U.S., the England part of Britain, people speak differently. So I'm just generalizing, and I'm going over standard words or standard pronunciations of these places. Regional areas are going to speak differently. Okay, some questions. And as you know, for these slides, for these lessons, I will pause after each question. You can actually pause the video and look up things, which I recommend you do, or you could just wait a few seconds and I'll keep moving on. All right, what language do they speak in the UK? What language do they speak in the US? Why do they sound different? Why do they have different words? Okay, English is spoken in the United Kingdom. English is spoken in the United States of America. Because the Atlantic Ocean separated the two places, the languages evolved differently. Languages evolve and change over time, and these two languages started shooting off, separating a long time ago, before there was internet, before there were even telephones they could call each other on to maintain some semblance of stability between them. And since languages are always changing and evolving, that's the main reason why they've changed so much. But one thing you should keep in mind is that they are still the same language. They're not completely separate languages, and they're not even different dialects. We could say they have different accents, maybe they use different words sometimes, but it's basically the same language. Most Americans can understand British people, and most British people can understand Americans. But they do sound differently and spell words differently and have different words sometimes. Okay, when looking at the British dictionary there, I didn't put every single thing in here, just some highlights going through the history of the British dictionary. In 1538, Sir Thomas Elyot published the predecessor to the first English dictionary, which was mostly a list of words not commonly used. In 1604, Robert Cowdrey published a dictionary with actual definitions, but only held 2,449 words. After 12 different versions of dictionaries prior to 1755, Samuel Johnson published the first comprehensive dictionary of the English language. Some of his definitions were prejudiced or invoked humor, meaning it was hard to, he threw things in there as a joke sometimes. So it was hard to call it a real dictionary per se. I mean, mostly it was. Let me give you an example, and I'm not saying this is an accurate example. He might say, if he were defining the word drunk, he might say me, right? He would make jokes. which most people understood. But if you're actually looking up a word because you don't understand it, those kind of jokes wouldn't be helpful. And basically, I only have maybe three or four in here, but there are basically 20 different things you could look at in history as to the evolution of the British dictionary. It was 173 years later that the Oxford Dictionary came out, the Oxford English Dictionary. While the British dictionary took a long, long time and evolved over time, and many, many people. There's one person we could primarily say is the father of the American dictionary, and that is Noah Webster, who was single-handedly responsible for the origins of the American dictionary. In order to better understand the etymology of certain words, he learned to read and speak 28 different languages. Now keep in mind I read this somewhere, but keep in mind he was not fluent in these languages. It's impossible to be fluent in 28 different languages. In many of these languages, he just knew basic pronunciation and he knew a number of words to maybe communicate slightly. Don't think for a second that he was fluent in 28 different languages. All the American spellings of words were at one time or another British spelling, and Webster often went with the easier spelling when deciding which to use. Not just for convenience in his mind, right, but because he believed that they took on more nuances of the root language. Today, most people say maybe the British spelling actually takes on more nuances of the actual words from the language we got it from. And the American language does that. The American spelling of English words does that less. Also, keep in mind today in the UK that people have a standard of spelling just like we did in the US. But the US dictionary actually predates the British dictionary for coming up with a standard spelling. At the time in the UK, and even a little bit after in the US, people would spell the same word differently. In Shakespeare's life, he spelled his name 5 different ways throughout his life. So there was a time in history where spelling was not that important. As long as people understood what you were trying to say, it was okay. Or what you were trying to write, or trying to spell, it was okay. There was no standard spelling in English for a very long time. It was the year 1828 when he published an American Dictionary of the English Language. It contained over 70,000 words, of which 12,000 words had never appeared in an English dictionary before. Today, the Merriam-Webster Dictionary is to the Americans what the Oxford Dictionary is to the British. So it's the standard we look at. There are other companies that make dictionaries. British people, if they want to be 100% sure, will look in the Oxford Dictionary. Americans will look in the Webster Dictionary. And Merriam was the publishing company. And for a while, Merriam and Webster really went together in the dictionary. But today, you can see other Merriam dictionaries that don't have Webster in it. I would recommend Merriam-Webster if you're living in the US, or the Oxford Dictionary if you're living in the UK. Okay, let's look at some spelling here. We're going to decide which spelling is the American and which one is the British. So for the first one, we have center and center. The first one ER, the second one RE. Which one's American and which one's British? All right, in the first one, center, the first spelling, CENTER, is American. The second is British. Gray and gray. For this one, the first one is American and the second one is British. Now, I spell most words as an American because I am an American. However, I prefer the British spelling of the word gray, Grey. And this primarily is due to J.R.R. Tolkien, who is a writer. He wrote The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit. I read those books when I was very young. There's a character named Gandalf the Grey, and this is repeated over and over and over, and it's soaked into my brain. And now I prefer the British spelling just because I was so young. And I had seen the American spelling, of course, but I just preferred it because it was just slammed into my brain over and over and over the British spelling. So normally I will spell Grey, Grey, but most Americans will use the A and most British will use the E. Now we have color and color. Okay, for this one, the first one is British. The OU is British, and just the O is American. The next one, we have defense and defense. For defense, the first one is British with the C. The second one is American with an S. The next one, we have analyze and analyze. For this one, the one with a Z or Z, as British people might say, the first one is American, the second one is British. The next one, tongue and tongue. For this one, the second one is both British and American. This is a trick question. But the reason I put it in is because Noah Webster, in his first edition of his dictionary, did try to have the tongue spelled T-U-N-G, but no one liked it. So everyone just stuck with T-O-N-G-U-E. Second edition, that's how it was. So this is a trick question. For tongue, the second one is okay for both British and American. The next one is theater and theater. Okay, for this one, the first one is British, the second one is American. British is R-E, American is E-R. And the last one here, we have pajamas and pajamas. Okay, for this one, the first one with an A is American, the second one with a Y is British. And as a side note, where do we get the word pajamas? What language does it come from? Keep in mind, English words come from other different languages, a lot of other different languages. There's an influence of Old English and an influence of Latin and just an influence of a lot of other different languages. So where do we get the word pajamas? From what language? We get the word pajamas from Hindi. It's a Hindi word, pajamas. All right. Look at the word at the top of the screen. How do you pronounce that word? How do British people pronounce it? How do Americans pronounce it? All right, first and foremost, I want to say that this is just most of these people, right? Most of these people, not all of them. In general, Americans will say tomato and British will say tomato. However, I have met a British person who has said tomato. I don't know if he normally says tomato or if he just said tomato because maybe he wasn't sure. I didn't understand what tomato was. I really don't know. But I have heard that there are, it's not everyone, right? Just in general, most people. Okay, what about this word at the top of the screen there? How do you say that word? How do Americans say that word? How do British people say that word? Now, actually, I've heard a lot of British people pronounce it the same way as Americans, but I haven't heard too many Americans pronounce it the same way as British people. So this is just in general. Normally, Americans will say schedule, and British people will say schedule. Again, not everyone. Okay, see that letter at the top of the screen? What do Americans call that letter? What do British people call that letter? In which country is the letter used more? Okay, Americans would usually call that a Z, and British people would usually call that Z. And actually, that is used a little bit more in American spellings of words than in British spellings of words. And I'll give you an example. Earlier, we looked at analyze and analyze, right? Americans would spell that with a Z, and British people would spell that with an S. But one of the things about that, sometimes if there's a Z sound, like surprise or analyze, Americans might spell it with an S, and they might spell it with a Z. But almost always British people are going to spell it with an S. So there's actually a little bit more of the use of Z or Z in American English than in British English. All right, one more thing before we move on to, well, actually, it would be the next lesson. This is all one PowerPoint, but I think I'm going to cut it in half. So this will be the last one for part one of this. And it's a pronunciation thing. All right. See the phrase on the right, the three-letter phrase? How would Americans say that phrase? How would an English person say that phrase? How would an Irish person say that phrase? Okay, you'll notice that I separated English and Irish this time. That's because they would say this differently, right? Basically, an American person would say, park the car, right? An English person would say, park the car. Now, my English is my attempt at other people's accents is very bad, but basically that no real R sound. Just pretend it's almost replaced with maybe an H, right? And again, my my attempt at imitating other accents are bad, but an Irish person might say, "Park the car." Okay, bad, right? My pronunciation, my attempts at other accents are bad, but in general, the standard Irish, English, and American way to say that has been represented. And you'll see English might almost have no R in that. Not that they won't sound out the letter R, but often if it's in the middle of a word or at the end of the word, they won't. Whereas an Irish person would pronounce it pretty strongly, and I'd say an American person might pronounce it more mildly. So that's it for this pronunciation part. Now, this lesson's a lot longer, but I decided to chop it in half, because I don't know, I was thinking it might be almost an hour. So we're just going to end it here, and then I'll get another lesson for the next time. My apologies if you heard some noise in the background, but I was really worried about getting this out tomorrow. To get it out tomorrow, I have to finish it today. And the computer I'm doing editing on won't be around tomorrow at all. So I have to get it recorded here on this computer and then edit on another computer that's not my computer. So that's why my output has been strange lately. Also, there's construction going on in this building, and you're hearing a little bit of it now. And I had to stop for a couple hours, and the construction just won't stop. And I was worried I wouldn't be able to get this finished, so I had to plug on through. Anyhow, thank you guys, and hopefully I'll see you next time, and there won't be any background noise. Okay, bye bye.